From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? I want to talk a little bit about healthcare. I came across some numbers many years ago. It has to do with hospital beds in Canada. And I really looked into this, and this was 15 or 20 years ago that I was doing this. And it's one of the most important causes of some of the healthcare messes that we have in Canada. For example, the long waits for elective surgeries. People have to wait 3 months, 6 months, a year, or 18 months for an operation. And this thing I'm going to talk about is, I think, one of the major causes of that. And similarly, we often hear of the chaos in our emergency rooms where people can't get into emergency and they have to wait. I mean, I spoke to somebody just a couple of days ago who waited 15 hours in pain in order to get into an emergency room here and be seen by a doctor. So, I mean, that's how crazy it's become. And this talks about the number of hospital beds in Canada. So in 1990, Canada had 179,000 hospital beds. 1990, 179,000 hospital beds. By 2003, that was down to 115,000 hospital beds. So we'd lost 1/3 of our hospital beds. And these numbers were publicly available back then, but they're not publicly available anymore, or at least I can't get them. But from what I've seen, I think the number of hospital beds in Canada now is down to under 90,000. So we've gone from 180,000 beds in 1990 to under 90,000 beds in 2024, with the population going from 28 million to 40 million, 12 million more people here. And what hospital beds do in relation to long waits for surgeries and for emergency room problems is that if the beds are full, a doctor cannot operate on a new patient because there's nowhere to put that person. And I phoned up years ago, I phoned up some doctors groups and I phoned up some nurses groups. And I said, is there this connection between the lack of beds and the long waits for surgery and the emergency room problems? And they said, absolutely, yes. And yet it's something that's never talked about. You know, again, the politicians and the media tell us how sorry they are that this problem exists of the long waits and the emergency room mess, but they never talk about the lack of hospital beds. And I think that's because if we talk about the lack of hospital beds, then there's a solution. We just need more hospital beds so we can do it. But they always tell us we have these problems, but there is no solution. It's like nobody really knows what the problem is, but they know very well what the problem is. And another part of the problem is, one reason we don't have the beds is that billions and billions of dollars are being sucked out of our healthcare system and turned into corporate profit. A lot of money is being sucked out of our healthcare system. So if you go into emergency and you can't get in for 5 hours or 10 hours, the reason is that the emergency room is full, and the patients that should be moved into the hospital cannot be moved into the hospital because, again, there are no beds. And because they can't move people out, it means people cannot get in and be seen by a doctor. So again, it's that lack of beds that is one of the biggest problems. And yet again, just like the lack of housing, the shortage of housing, the shortage of beds. You know, once the people who run things find a game that works for them, they play it over and over again. And once again, the politicians, they don't work for us. And the media, they don't work for us. And so once again, Canadians have to pay this price of a failing healthcare system. And when, in my opinion, there's no need for any of this. Our healthcare system should work like a Swiss watch. right? There shouldn't be waits. There's no need for it. But, it's profit, and they don't want a public healthcare system to work because it doesn't look good. They want a private healthcare system, although I'm sure the corporations are very happy because right now they have a system where the public pays, we pay, and they just take money out, and we still can't have a good system. So, and that's the way Canada operates in many, many, many different ways. It's not for us. It's not our country. It's their country, being the people at the top.
The goal is privatization. And as you know, there was a call for government of British Columbia in 2009 to hire a supervisor for different departments of the government. And one of the conditions was the requirement from these managers was to have ability to create crisis to force change. So here they are creating crisis in healthcare system to force the change they want, and that is privatization. And 30% of the budget of the healthcare system in British Columbia go for the management. They are ripping us off while they are destroying the healthcare system.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people over the years who work in hospitals, and especially years ago, they would comment on the number of no frontline people were being hired, but more and more management who often just get in the way. Norm, any comment on that one?
Well, I just keep thinking about the last time I was in the hospital that because they decided they had a shortage of beds, they literally forced me out when I had not recovered enough to be able to look after myself at all. Basically, their attitude was, well, you can live on the street until you get things organized. And they did very much want to make sure that I was addicted to some form of opioid. They really didn't care which one I took. As long as I was addicted, they would have been quite happy living on the street. As well, we'll just say, as a fentanyl user, would have made them very happy. That it's the lack of hospital beds, I think, is part of our problem of homelessness on the street. Yeah. It all ties back in together. It's almost like they've got to plan all these things. You look at it and you realize, hey, that's connected to this, and that's whatever it is. It's all connected to driving our whole society down.
Yeah, and none of this has anything to do with the people working in the hospitals. I mean, they're doing their best in a very difficult situation.
They work hard.
Yeah, this is at the government level and the corporate level and the upper management level. Yeah. Norm, we were gonna do a little interview on democracy. So
yes, every time I see Mehdi, I remember a comment he made about, of course, we live in a democracy. We get to choose our dictator. Once every 4 years, we live there for 15 seconds or whatever for the ballot. And well, that's my view of the state of democracy in Canada. What is your view on the state of the democracy in Canada?
So yeah, my view is that I think Canadians would be surprised at how non-functioning our democracy is. I believed for my whole life that Canada was a great democracy because that's what I've been told my whole life. But over the past, I guess, more than 20 years, I've come to see, because I started to write a little book on democracy quite by accident. And after a few years of, researching, I remember looking around one day and I thought, how come if I live in this great democracy, I don't know anything about how a democracy is supposed to operate, right? And I finally began to realize that there is virtually no democracy here in Canada. The public is irrelevant. The country is run by the corporate sector and the 0.01%. And that is a problem we've got to deal with. And right now, the only way I can think of dealing with it is, first, we have to understand the problem, that we do not have a democracy. And we have to be willing to do some work to try to get it back. And one thing I think we can do, if we could do it together under some kind of leadership group, would be for people to join their favorite political parties, whatever party that may be, and just try to democratize it. Not fight for the things you want, right? Like I was in the NDP for 2 years. And what I saw in that party, the BC NDP, which is the government of this province. So I was in the party for 2 years, and I really tried to be active in pushing to make it more democratic. But it is run by a small gang at the top. And to them, the party membership is completely irrelevant. They just do what they want. And they run the party, this little gang. And they do not work for the membership. They don't care what the members want. And the membership puts up with it. And in part, they put up with it because they say, well, when the election comes, which we just had an election here in BC not long ago, the members who were treated so badly by their own leadership said, well, the Conservative Party is going to be worse, so we have to vote NDP. And they do. And they support the NDP. And it's that never-ending runaround that the other guys are going to be worse, so we'll support our leadership. Our leadership, is totally corrupt and undemocratic, but at least they're better than the next guys. And, I mean, that is a hell of a way to run a province or a country, because it's the same at the federal level. We're now seeing with Mr. Trudeau being out and maybe Mr. Poilievre being in, or maybe Mr. Carney, who knows. But at any rate, the people of Canada are still irrelevant, and we can't be. If we want to save ourselves, and I'm talking about this housing mess that we're in, the healthcare mess that we're in, the fact that almost half of us now will get cancer during our lifetime. Why? Because the corporations are free to poison us. Nobody stops them because they run the country. And so that is the state of democracy in Canada, and it's right down to the city level.
Well, Jack, just thinking about it, that when we were in our teens, I think we did have a better democracy then. Maybe we were just living in La La Land and didn't realize.
No, I would agree.
In Kyushu, whether it was 20 years ago when you first started thinking about it, or it's gradually been a loss of democracy to the point now that we just don't have a democracy anymore, which is a real loss. That for me, to me, democracy is important. Would you say democracy is important?
Yeah, I'd say it is one of the most important things, which is why it's never talked about. I mean, there is never a headline in our media or our politicians talking about it. What is the state of our democracy? They just tell us it's great, and for the most part, we believe them, which I always did for as I said, for most of my life. Mehdi, any comment?
I think we are having an illusion of believing in democracy, and we perpetuate that illusion. And yes, maybe 20 years ago it was better because as the time passed, the system squeezed us much more and more out of the middle class into a lower class, and finally abject poverty and in the street. All these parties, if they have a opportunity to be elected, the ones that are being supported by a sizable number of people, by the time they get to that stage, they are all sold out to the corporate interests. The definition I gave for the function of government is to manage the population while implementing corporate policies and agenda. So every one of them do the same. They are the differences between how voracious, for example, Mr. Poilievre will be in cutting taxes and cutting social expenditure and putting more people in the street as homeless and in abject poverty. And the rate may be a little bit less in terms with the liberals and NDP, but all of them will implement corporate policies to give more and more to the corporations and elite, and get and less to the middle class and people that live in poverty. And that has been the projection of where we are going, and it's going to continue unless people wake up and see that this is not a democracy, that our politicians are all compromised, and we need to bring people together. And I suggest, if they want to do that, they start with municipal politics. Go to your municipal council and push the community interest and public interest, and then from there to provincial and federal government.
Yeah. Norm, any comment?
Well, I was going to say that shortly after this, I do have to go to the municipal council on a housing issue. In this case, we want to stop it, and there's good reason for it. It's totally wrong what they're doing.
Well, why don't we go into that then? Because I think you wanted to talk about that next.
Yeah, okay. This is for Central Saanich Council, that there is a proposal to put roughly 200 units in, actually basically next door to me, and they're talking about affordable housing and housing for seniors. And I mean, it all sounds nice when you look at the application. But when you go back a little further into it, you realize, or you see that Central Saanich was, according to a mandate, we were supposed to have something like 580 new houses, or new residents, not houses, new residents between 2020 and 2025. Well, so far there are 599 that have been built, and there's another 200 to come in here, plus more on the drawing board. And that's sorry. That's shall we say, caused quite an uproar in the municipality. There's so many questions about that whole thing that there's roughly 300, this getting into the democracy discussion, roughly 300 or more letters have shown up at council, which in Central Saanich, that's a good portion of the number that vote opposed to it. But there's a good chance it's all going to go for this, to go to a hearing to change the OCP, which was done just a couple of years ago, but we've got to change it again.
And the OCP is the official community plan.
That's correct. And it just shows how little the people have. That the OCP should be something that 2 years ago, that's what we want. That's our democratic view. Why should we have to go and defend it 2 years later?
Yeah. And what is the position of your city council?
Seems to be a bit of an up and down, that there's some people that want more housing, but unfortunately this housing won't help the homeless at all. It won't help the homeless at all, because the rent will be for 2 to 3 times the amount of money these people get per month. Yeah. There's no way they're going to rent these places. You drive down Pandora Street, if you think they're going to move out there, well, a lot of them won't move that far out into the country to start with. But if they do, they wouldn't be able to afford the rent. Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, and this is something we should look into, in my opinion, if you increase the supply of housing, then that will lead to lower rents, moving right down even if you're increasing the supply of housing at the upper end, just the fact that there is more housing will have an impact on rent. So we should look into that and try to come up with some kind of definitive answer.
That's the, shall we say, true basis behind capitalism that would happen. But it's not happening.
Well, I do agree. So far, it's definitely not happening.
Yeah, and so why it's not happening, I don't really want to say for sure because I don't know. All I know is that I see vacant places at times, quite often, for a long time, and we'll just say 2-bedroom for $2,500 a month, and they're vacant. Now, in true capitalism, they keep dropping the rent down to who knows what to get it filled, but they don't. They're quite happy to keep it vacant for $2,500 a month.
But whoever owns it, I mean, how can they? I mean, they're losing $2,500 a month, or let's say they're losing $2,200 a month, because if they dropped it to 22, maybe somebody would move in. I mean, how long can any owner keep a place vacant if you know, when they're paying, you know, whatever the mortgage is on the property that they built or own, and you know, if they're not renting it, then they're getting no revenue from that spot. So, Mehdi?
Because they owned by not individuals. These buildings are owned by investors group.
Yes.
And these investors group are multinationals. The same thing that is happening in Canada is happening in US, in UK, in New Zealand and Australia, the 5 West Anglo countries.
Yes.
Because the policies that the governments of these 5 countries are following is to help the developers and the investors' interest, not the public interest. As you said at the beginning, we are in this mess because we stopped building publicly built housing on public land. In 1991, they lobbied the federal and provincial government to stop building public housing. And that's why we have this problem today.
Yes. And in 1991, it was a liberal government that did that, right? Federally?
No, actually, it was the Mulroney government.
Was Mulroney still in 1991?
Oh, yes.
Okay. But I know it was the liberal government that came in next, the Chrétien government, that brought in the biggest tax cuts for the rich in Canadian history, along with the biggest cuts to social programs in Canadian history. So as you were talking about earlier, it really doesn't matter which one it is, you know. They will do what they're told. The Liberals will bring in the big cuts to social programs, and now if Poilievre comes in, the Conservatives will bring them in. But we're going to have the cuts because that's what's demanded by the capitalists at the top.
No, they first, in 1994, they first cut with the austerity program. And then by 1999, they start giving a huge tax cut to the corporation and reduce their taxes. Now we have this total inequality.
Yes.
It's because, and this homelessness and poverty, because the tax cut to the rich, they keep most of their money and increase it while we are paying the ills of our society with having people homeless and having people with mental illness in the street and dying from drug overdose. And if you remember, the reason for this drug overdose is, again, was the tax cut to the rich by the provincial liberal government in 2001 and 2. And then they opened the gambling in order to get some money that they lost through the tax cut, and allow the drug traffickers bring cases of money, you know, to the casinos and cash them out and launder the money through casinos.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that I keep coming back to that we live in a one-party system. It's called the deep state. Now we've got basically 4 franchises. We've got the green franchise, the red franchise, the blue, and the orange franchise. And it really doesn't matter which one you vote for because they're all answering to the same deep state. And it's, I guess it just, to me, it just shows how we're really not in a democracy at all. We don't even get to vote for the ones that are controlling the shop. We just get to vote for the PR people that sit in the legislature and yell and scream at each other and are there for basically our entertainment, I guess you could say.
You know, I've read a few books by members of parliament, former members of parliament, who kind of feel that same way. And they routinely call themselves trained SEALs, right? They laugh at themselves because they say that's all we can do. We have to do what the party leadership tells us to do. And that's actually something that if Canadians got organized and we could change that one thing, it would make a huge difference in our country. And that is the right of the party leader to sign the nomination papers of any candidate who wants to run for that party. Even if we could take that one power away from the party leader, so they didn't have total control of the candidates, it would be more useful.
I spoke to a provincial party leader one time. Very nice person, honorable person, and even if you don't like his politics, you can like him, support him as a person.
Yeah.
He told me that even he doesn't get to do what he wants. The board of directors tells him what to do. Once they get up close to the reins of power, all they are there for, as far as I can tell, is to be a figurehead, to do what they are told, what the deep state tells them to do.
Yeah. And I don't mind the party leader not being in control. I mean, it should be the party members that are in control, not the directors who are, at the top.
You don't even know their names.
Yeah, you don't even know their names.
Okay, I have to go. I'm sorry.
Mehdi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mehdi.
And Norm, I think we've just about brought this show to an end, unless there's any last comments you'd like to make.
No, I think that I'll make those comments next week.
Okay. Then thank you all for watching this segment of Citizens Forum, and see you again next show.